So again, my name is Risa Shimoda. I'm Executive Director of the River Management Society, and we have a fantastic group of folks here who I think collectively would say that this area of their work is narrow and deep. It's of interest to the folks here. It might be almost something that folks don't think about, except for these type of folks who work on aquatic invasive species at hydropower plants. So if you're not familiar with River Management Society or our series, we're doing a few webinars this spring, thanks to a partnership with the National Park Service. We did a kind of a toolkit for a couple of different websites, the River Management Society website and the Hydropower Reform Coalition website on the 8th, and then we'll do a couple others after this one's over. And this is the group that you're going to hear from today. So our moderator, Susan, is going to explain who everyone is. So I'm going to hand it off to her. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Risa. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. So my name, again, is Susan Pasco. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in our branch of aquatic invasive species. And there I have the honor of serving as Executive Secretary of our Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force. So before I turn it over to our great presenters here today, I just wanted to set with the stage with just kind of giving an overview on what are aquatic invasive species and why do they matter. So, aquatic invasive species, or AIS, are non-native plants, animals, or pathogens that are introduced into water ecosystems that cause harm. So these species can impact ecosystems by outcompeting native species and disrupting habitats. They create economic costs by damaging infrastructure and fisheries, and they can affect people by limiting recreation as well as impacting water quality. So when we talk about an aquatic species, this is one that would occur either in freshwater, in an estuary, or in marine waters. And once they are established, they are extremely difficult to control. And that's why prevention, early detection, response, and coordination are critical to helping protect those waters. Next slide, please. All right, I just want to give a couple of quick examples. Some I'm sure will be probably mentioned throughout our presentations here today. So first example here at the top is zebra and quagga mussels, which were introduced to the Great Lakes in the 1980s through ballast water. And since that time, they've spread very rapidly through much of the country and are a major threat to our western waters. They harm ecosystems by filtering out food that native species rely on, and they can also attach to native mussels, which will often kill them. These mussels also create significant economic cost, particularly to industries such as power plants that will spend millions each year clearing them from clogged water intake systems. The bottom here, we have invasive carp, which can include bighead as well as silver carp. These fish consume large amounts of plankton and vegetation, which can disrupt food webs and outcompete native fish. Their populations can quickly dominate ecosystems, which will reduce biodiversity and affect water quality. And as you can see in the picture here, silver carp also pose a real safety risk. They do jump very high out of the water when they are disturbed through things such as boat engines. And the final picture I have here is hydrilla, which is an invasive aquatic plant that forms dense mats on the water surface. These mats can be extremely problematic as they create low oxygen conditions that can also lead to fish kills. They can reduce water flow, they can clog waterways, and they can interfere with recreation as well as navigation. Next slide. All right, so how do these species get there? How do they move around? So here is not inclusive, but some of the common pathways for aquatic invasive species. One of the most significant is commercial shipping. The United States receives a large volume of goods through ports, which can create risk from ballast water discharge and organisms that attach to the ship hulls. We also do see a lot of species moving through recreational activities. Things such as boats, trailers, gear such as fishing and dive equipment can unintentionally move species between waterways. Organisms can also be introduced through release or escape. such as aquarium pets, classroom species, improperly disposed baits, as well as escapes from aquaculture facilities, nurseries, water gardens, and live food markets. And one final pathway I wanted to highlight here is marine debris, one we don't really think of very often. But one example might be debris from the 2011 Japanese tsunami, which carried organisms across the Pacific, particularly on that large dock that you see at the top of the slide here. And that was an incident that really helped us highlight the significance of that pathway, being able to move species large distances. Next slide. Thanks, Risa. So I mentioned all this information just to emphasize that aquatic invasive species are significant in their breadth and scope. They include many different taxa. They can threaten ecosystems around the globe, and they can be transported through numerous pathways. So the great extent of this really emphasizes that one agency, one organization, one work group really cannot tackle this threat alone. So Congress recognized this fact when they established the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force in 1990. So under the legislation, the task force was formed to develop and implement a program for waters of the United States to prevent the introduction and dispersal of aquatic invasive species, to monitor and control and study these species, and to disseminate related information. So very quickly, this is just a visualization of all the different components of the task force. We do have 13 federal members, agency members, chaired by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA. And we also do have 12 non-governmental ex officio members that really help broad to make sure we're getting all different diverse aspects of how people and organizations are impacted by aquatic invasive species. The orange there is our 6 regional panels that focus on regional issues, and a lot of the work throughout the task force is accomplished through our numerous subcommittees and work groups that are listed in blue below. Next slide. And here I just wanted to end with some of the visualization of some of the recent work of the task force that is completed through our strategic plan. So some of the products the task force has developed is our invasive species expert database. We've also developed a template for rapid response plans last year. Throughout their establishment, we have drafted and completed several species control or pathway mitigation plans. We managed 2 different national outreach campaigns, and recently we have also completed a national invasive species research priority list. So that is just a quick overview of some of the guidance materials and products that is produced throughout this organization. So just to wrap it up, the AIS task force focuses on coordination and national strategies, but we know that aquatic invasive species impacts are felt across many sectors. So hydropower obviously is one of those areas. And so the presentations you'll hear today will walk through some of those challenges and considerations. So that, I think we can go to the next slide, and we will turn it over to Brian. Right. So our first speaker up will be Brian Wood. Brian is the senior land manager at First Light Power, whose team oversees uses of company lands that include 3 of the largest lakes in Connecticut, the upper reaches of the wild and scenic Housatonic River, the Connecticut River from the Turner Falls Dam in Massachusetts, which extends up to southern New Hampshire and Vermont, and the upper reaches of the Allegheny River in Pennsylvania. Brian's role includes maintaining and improving stakeholder, agency, public, and elected officials' communication and negotiating complex resolutions to land management and natural resource challenges. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Susan. I know to get an introduction, First Light, who we are and where we are. You can see the blue facilities are our footprint throughout New England and portions of Canada. We're a leading clean energy producer, developer, energy storage company serving North America. For decades, our clean energy projects have been delivering clean, safe, reliable electricity to communities across North America. Presentation is going to focus on our pump storage in the fleet. If you haven't heard of a pump storage, there's the Housatonic River Basin you'll see in the photo on the top left, and it's a Rocky River plant. One of the first pump storages built in the United States, built in 1927. And we can go to the next slide. Story of aquatic invasive species in New England. We've got most of them establishing different time rates. They spread throughout the United States. We've got Eurasian water milfoil came in the 1970s. We've got hydrillas spread into our water basin in the last 2 years. We've had water chestnut show up and be managed. We've had zebra mussels. You'll see some of that, and Asian clam that's been around and nobody even studies or knows about it. Next. This gives you kind of a footprint wide. Hydro fleets are really unique. They typically occupy a whole watershed system. In this instance, we're focusing on Connecticut's largest lake, Candlewood Lake. It's about 6,000 acres. It's also the largest battery as a pump storage. You can see it highlighted with a little arrow through the entire Housatonic River system, which is that larger red watershed. We interlace up into Massachusetts, and our headwaters comes down through our Falls Village plant, then our Bulls Bridge plant, both run a river. Then it hits our pump storage plant, Candlewood, where we pump the water up the hill and hold it like a battery, 200 feet in elevation. And then we'll generate it out of Candlewood through our Stevenson and Chepaug conventional hydros before it enters into Long Island Sound. Next slide. Zebra mussels, real high level. We've seen them already. Susan, thanks for the great intro. They establish in our water bodies. We get them, they initially show up in a veliger stage, which are little tiny infant zebra mussels swimming around in the water columns. If they have the calcium and temperature that they can sustain at, they'll attach. You guys can read the fun facts about zebra mussels. They stay above our oxygen level, so if it's anoxic, they won't survive. They filter each one about a quart a day. They live 4 to 5 years. The real challenge is, like all invasive species, they have some key indicator that they're powerful in that they create 1 million eggs per year. Next slide. So this one, Lisa will run through the animation. I know I didn't realize it was animated until I sent it out last night. Starting left to right, you can see a grate that's on one of our hydro intakes. And then you can see a year later to 2 years later, that's how densely they establish. You can see them establishing in pipes and cooling water and things that we might have as part of industry. And there's a boat prop that we found that was on the bottom of the lake. So you can see it's attaching to any hard surface that they can find. They're going to occupy it if there's food and they're successful in establishing. Next slide. The other challenge with all invasives is the economic piece that Susan alluded to. You know, there's a fear factor associated with these new things in our ecosystem. You know, a home on one of our reservoirs, Candlewood Lake, could sell for $2.5 million. And they're saying, well, what happens? Is this going to impact my house value? How's the ecosystem going to change? And then people start running numbers on what's the environmental economic impact. Luckily, we didn't have as drastic of an impact as they established throughout the watershed, but that's one of the first things that humans say. How is this going to impact me economically? So we can go to the next slide. This is zebra mussel life cycle. You get adults somewhere in the water system. They're able to release their veligers. The veligers start to establish. Once they're setting in, then you start to see juveniles. They're established in the young adult phase, and then they move to adult. So you have essentially a 2 to 3 year early detection. Hopefully you catch them. You can find a management technique or an option. You can erase it. And then the next slide shows how you do that early detection. Putting out zebra mussel hotels, which can be done by volunteers in the community to try to see if you have them. That's a really good early detection mode. If you know that they're present and you want to see if they're spreading, then you move over to capture nets and veligers and you're trying to determine, do I have these in my water and I can't see them yet? Next slide. At First Light, we worked with all our stakeholders in the community. We realized how much this is going to impact. We found them, and I believe you'd have to hit next. I think there's automation on this one too, Risa. Yeah, we discovered them in around 2009, 2010. We began monitoring them. We worked with the community because our pump storage is isolated from the main stem of the river. The zebras were going to establish in the main stem of the river at whatever speed they spread and occupied. However, our pump storage, the company made a decision, we're going to voluntarily not pump during the time of year when we know these veligers are in the water column, and we were able to detect them and study them. So we made a 9-year commitment to not operate from May through October, taking an impact to the company, but given society and the community an opportunity to see, is there anything that we could do? In the end, they did occupy in the ecosystem and start reproducing, but they're at a much lower rate than if we had pumped and brought them in 10 years earlier. Next slide. This is we got our flag in 2019, but as we go through the automation, you'll see how fast these guys establish. As Susan has alluded, they came in through the Great Lakes through ballast tanks, and then they moved by birds and other migration, and they've footprint and established themselves throughout the United States and along with other mussel species that are moving as well. Eurasian water milfoil, we've had this since the 1970s. We meet with stakeholders annually. Our FERC license considered the impact of nuisance aquatic plants. We study them and we work with all our stakeholders and we inform mapping and we meet with them every year and make decisions about how to manage these different species as they occupy the ecosystem. And we managed them from the 1970s with deep and shallow drawdowns in some of our ecosystems. We could expose them to the frost, and that was really successful for a number of years. Next slide. This one's a little bit off. That's my fault. The red box is supposed to be on that bay to the bottom of 24. But timeline-wise, since the 1970s, we'd been managing Eurasian water milfoil upwards of 500 acres at its peak on the reservoir, about 10% of the lake's shoreline, our surface area. And then through 2020, that's how we managed it, working with stakeholders, studying it, managing it, understanding how drawdowns worked and how it was effective. In 2015, you can see the red and pink. It was pretty well established anywhere that it could grow. That's how it had been since the 70s. 2020, you can see a bit of a decline, a little bit less red. And then by 2024, no aquatic weeds in the entire reservoir. So the challenge with managing invasive species or native species is us as humans, we change something and that impacts the ecosystem. So constantly monitoring and understanding what's coming, what's there, and how you're managing it and how they interact. Next slide. So now we know why in 2024 we had no Eurasian water milfoil. The community, along with First Light's help, tried to determine could we use grass carp. Successfully used in other ecosystems throughout the U.S. They're sterile. We released them with the state of Connecticut and the local authorities all decided this is our management technique. They released grass carp in 2015, about 4,000 fish. They didn't see a really significant impact, so they increased it with another stocking. And once they increased with the second stocking and the fish got bigger, they ate every single plant in Connecticut's largest lake. So now we're on the rebound side, which is remove some fish in order to get back into balance and having some weeds. But as these decisions are made, the ecosystems change and we study them and work with the community. Next slide. This was what was so interesting for me when Risa reached out is how do hydro companies play a role? So we have a ton of control over how the river system works while we're providing clean energy to the communities that we operate in. We have scientists and research and capability and knowledge, and we're kind of centralized. We're the operator of the lake that you might live on if it's a hydro. We have multi-lake systems and sometimes multi-state footprint. As you've seen in the earlier slides, we cover a whole watershed and control how that water gets out to the saltwater. We also have a budget. We react a lot faster than governments can. Sometimes government takes some time to spin up. We might be able to supplement some of that science or research, or we may have already studied it. We have skin in the game. It directly affects our ecosystem, and the ecosystem changing affects our generation and our capability to operate the business. We have tons of data, a lot of data on how the river actually functions and works throughout 100 years sometimes in the case of this reservoir on Candlewood Lake, where we created the lake 100 years ago. We know how it runs. We control the flow in and out of it. So we were able to partner with a lot of our stakeholders and create a communication hub where we were able to help everybody align on these ecosystems as they change. And to the last point, we just have a lot of stakeholders. Everyone who lives around the ecosystems understands and knows us and has my phone number and might reach out with a question, and that helps thread things together on the early detection and management side. So Risa, with that, thank you for offering First Light to give you some information. The other folks are going to be a lot smarter than me. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Brian. All right, as we transition here, we have two presenters who are going to build off each other. The first one is going to be Brett Hardis. Brett is the lead hydro licensing project manager for Duke Energy's water strategy and hydro licensing team based in Charlotte, North Carolina. He oversees federal energy regulatory commissions, licensing of Duke Energy's hydroelectric assets, and works at the intersection of energy, natural resources, and environmental stewardship. Brett has expertise for bringing practical, science-based solutions to complex, stakeholder-driven challenges, balancing technical requirements with the diverse needs and perspectives of communities, agencies, and various other groups. Brett is going to be presenting with Robert Richardson. Rob is the professor and extension specialist for aquatic and non-cropland weed science at North Carolina State University. Rob is responsible for the development of aquatic weed and non-crop invasive plant management programs. And this position is critical for the development of integrated and sustainable weed management programs for reservoirs, lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water and non-croplands in North Carolina and the surrounding region. Vegetation on these sites must be managed in an environmentally sound manner to improve or maintain fish and wildlife habitat, improve biological diversity, and reduce the size and scope of invasive plant invasions. And with that, I will turn it over to Brett and Rob.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. And Brian, great job. You're going to make my presentation very easy to give with the hydropower perspective. Just to give a brief introduction to who Duke Energy is, at least in the hydro sector, we operate across 8 separate river basins in North and South Carolina, have roughly 27 reservoirs, which are supported by those 26 hydro generation stations. We have a total, I believe, of 82 or 83 hydro units across all of those reservoirs. So a pretty large portfolio, which primarily provides for peak power production, along with a diverse portfolio of other generating sources at Duke Energy. All right, let's hop to the next slide. So to set the stage in the Southeast, and I know we were kind of doing this bouncing around the country, I have to preface this with the environment in the Southeast was quite different than even what we believe to be native today. This is just an excerpt from John Lawson's Early Flora and Fauna of the Carolinas. You can see there on the left some pretty immaculate drawings of some of the terrestrial fauna at the time. And of course, the landscape itself was quite different, dominated by savanna grasslands, not necessarily the forested terrestrial systems we're used to today. Similarly, next slide. The river systems were quite the same, dominated by a number of different Nadroma species. We had a lot of different fish species in these river systems than we do in current day. Next slide. As we, in the early 1900s, I believe, at least on the Catawba Watery, our first dam was built in 1908 at Lake Wylie. Of that system, 10 more were built between then and 1964. And with that, the ecosystem and a lot of the, quote, native flora and fauna that folks are familiar with today, kind of found a home in these large reservoirs, which are essentially artificial systems in themselves. Next slide. So Susan did a phenomenal job of defining invasive species. I do want to preface this, too, with the fact that less than 2% of introduced species end up becoming invasive. The problem is that less than 2% usually costs us millions, if not billions of dollars as a country annually. Invasiveness, I see this term kind of thrown around haphazardly, but you're really looking at 2 primary functions. One being that they're not indigenous to a location or region, and 2, they can cause economic or environmental harm. This is all relative to location. We do have some, quote, invasive species that come from other rivers, river systems, even within North America. So it's all about the system in which it occurs. But that invasiveness is defined by not just the ability of that species to survive, but its ability to thrive in those ecosystems. For example, if we've got anybody on the call that's heard there's nothing as American as apple pie, I have to say it's quite the misnomer. The majority of apples, or at least the ancestors of apples, came from regions of Kazakhstan. So that in itself shows you things that we're familiar with that have been here for a very long time and have become naturalized aren't necessarily native, but they're also not necessarily invasive. What's really important when you define something as an invasive species, though, is its ability, again, to thrive. And if you look here on this invasion curve, where you insert yourself in terms of management really determines what you'll be able to do, at least with a limited amount of time and funding. The kind of upsetting part about this is, as time increases, costs most certainly increase, and very seldom do we go backwards. In other words, we can't roll things back into that prevention or even the eradication stage once a species has become naturalized and widely spread. Next slide. Again, Susan did a great job at this one. I'm primarily going to talk about aquatic plants today, and a lot of our aquatic plants came through water gardens, also the aquarium trade. If you've spent much time at PetSmart or Petco in the last few years, you'll notice the majority of the habitat that you can buy for your fish tanks is plastic. There's good reason for that. I'm going to focus a lot on hydrilla today, which came in basically two waves: the dioecious biotype in the 50s. As part of the aquarium trade, was introduced into a ditch in the Tampa Bay area of Florida, and I think took the entire state over by the 70s. And then the introduction of monoecious hydrilla, which we primarily have up here in the Carolinas, into the Potomac in the 1980s timeframe. Again, something that really seemed somewhat harmless, that has become a kind of the bane of our existence in the Southeast, at least in terms of reservoir management. Next slide. All right, so just a few of the notable aquatic invasive species of the Catawba wateree, which is our main hydropower reservoir in the Carolinas. You heard Brian mention the Asiatic clam or corbicula, pretty widespread, and we have a lot of that in our reservoirs across North and South Carolina. The mystery snail, another one that has become quite problematic, tends to be seasonal and vary in terms of population size, but we did have that get into one of our municipal drinking water intakes into an opening and shut down that system for a number of months as they made repairs. Alligator weed, a species from South America, can be pretty much found all over the Southeast along just about any river system. We have quite a bit of it in the Catawba wateree, but by far the most problematic and widespread is hydrilla. Next slide. So why are they so problematic in reservoirs? And I set the stage with the fact that these are artificial systems in themselves. So there is really no native aquatic plant base to compete with a lot of these species. They're also very good at what they do. In many cases, they have competitive advantage. Hydrilla tends to wake up earlier and go to bed later in terms of photosynthesis. Needs very little light availability. Also in our southeastern reservoirs, as compared to some of the more ligotrophic systems in the northeast, they're essentially nutrient sinks. So a lot of what goes into these reservoirs comes from adjacent farmland and undeveloped lands. We have legacy nutrient issues. So it's essentially a never-ending buffet of resources for species when they come in. And in most cases, our reservoirs are large but relatively shallow. So the littoral zone or area with sunlight availability makes it the perfect home for most of these invasive aquatic plant species. Next slide. So the first instance, at least in the Carolinas, of noticing that this could be a problem for hydropower occurred at the St. Stephen's Hydro Station in 1991. That's a Santee Cooper facility and core facility. Spring storm broke loose some large mats of I see you there, Kevin. Broke loose some large mats in the spring of dioecious hydrilla and sent that directly to the dam there at the St. Stephen's facility. Caused a 4-month outage. About 900 loads were hand removed from that station. Caused the site roughly $5 million in losses and damage. Another piece I didn't include here, I think to date it caused the state's largest fish kill downstream, as they were unable to pass water and maintain environmental flows downstream. So lots of losses to not only sport fish, but to even some T&E species, somewhere in the $1 million range. So we quickly realized what impacts that a little plant could cause for hydropower. Next slide. And in most cases, you saw hydrilla really spread itself out across the entire southeastern U.S. These are some photos from the Tennessee River system on Gunnersville, which was largely a milfoil-dominated system throughout the 60s and 70s, and hydrilla came in the late 80s, early 90s, and really filled in anything that was 15 feet or less. So you can imagine in shallow reservoirs, that's not mud flats or anything like that. That's 10 to 15 feet of water completely topped out in vegetation. Next slide. Similarly, here at Duke Energy, we were absolutely no stranger to hydrilla. It was introduced in the lower end of the Catawba in '94 and has really begun recurring on about a 10 to 12-year basis. We see it poke its head out of little hidey holes in places that it found refuge from management techniques like grass carp. Next slide. So some emerging species of concern, eelgrass. If there's any restoration folks on the call, this was touted as probably one of the best revegetation plants that you could use for fish habitat. The problem was I don't think we really understood some of the genetic variability in some of the species and even in some of the species crosses that were available. This is eelgrass in Gunnersville Reservoir and Wheeler Lake. That has shut down one of their nuclear sites multiple times now as large mats become dislodged during high wind and water events. So really a species that we thought would be really great for some of these ecosystems. Turned out we weren't actually dealing with what we thought we were, and now have problems that rival hydrilla or more. Next slide. And lastly, in a species that we're seeing pop its head up more often in a lot of our reservoirs is Lingbia, recently renamed the genus Microcera woolii. It's a benthic cyanobacteria that, in short, looks about like sewage to most folks. When we get phone calls about this, usually it's a report of a sewage leak. Has major causes major issues with taste and odor compounds for municipal drinking water, and of course can clog some of our hydro operations as well. Next slide. I think I'm almost done. So one of the important things about these water resources, while Duke Energy maintains the license to use these water resources for hydropower production, the Catawba Watery alone has many other uses, including providing 2 million people with their drinking water. Of course, we have recreation visits from tens of millions of folks per year. Basically, we all have a shared resource with a shared interest. And we've been lucky enough to develop partners over time, which is Duke's primary role, is to bring all these partners together and leverage state cost share funding. I know many states in the U.S. don't have this. We're lucky in North and South Carolina, where the state will match dollar for any management that is undertaken by a local partnership. So we spend a good portion of our year developing partnerships, assessing issues that I think Rob's going to talk about, and making management decisions. Next slide. And I can jump through this one. Next slide. Get us back on time. So I think another important piece of the puzzle, though, as we see habitat degradation of these reservoirs age and lose a lot of that hard habitat that we had in initial construction, there is a need for quote unquote native aquatic plant species and restoration. We don't want to create a sense of anything green in our reservoirs is bad, but we also have to do these things with caution. As I mentioned with Balsinaria or eelgrass earlier, there are ways that we can improve habitat in these reservoirs, but we do need to do that with a little bit of vetting and caution as we remember how these resources are used. Next slide. All right, I think this is my final slide. Something important to remember here. This is a never-ending battle. I know Susan's Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force looks at a lot of these things and the potential for invasion. These were a lot of species that were not in North Carolina back in 2016. Next slide. And the majority have since found their way into the state. There's always something knocking on the door, always something new to battle. And the partnerships that I mentioned earlier are critical to establish and maintain as we work through issues and find solutions to species early. There will be something right behind it to attack after that. Next slide. All right, I think we're ready to turn it over to Rob.
Thank you, Brett. We can just flip ahead. So I'm going to speak in more general terms, but when we're approaching aquatic plant management, there's a few things that we really need to consider. So, what are the system parameters? What should the natural state of the system be? Will invasive weeds decrease ecosystem quality? Will those weeds decrease human satisfaction? And also, how likely are new introductions? Next, please. So as we start formulating weed management decisions, it's really important to take note of some aspects of the system. So of course, use of the body of water is really important. And if we're talking about reservoirs, most of our reservoirs are multi-purpose. So that could be recreation, power generation, potable water. They could be used for residential development around the lake shore. A lot of different potentials here. Then moving into the plants, we really need to know what we're dealing with. What's the biology and ecology of these species? Which species are weedy? Which ones are desirable? Then we also need to consider fish and wildlife populations. Are we managing this reservoir for fish? Are we managing it for waterfowl? You know, typically if you want waterfowl, you want a lot of plants. If you want game fish, you don't necessarily need plants, depending on the game fish species. What is the water quality? And what do we want the water quality to be? And then there are going to be physical, environmental, and also economic limitations to what we may or may not be able to do with any of these sites. Next, please. So as we approach management, there's definitely no silver bullet or one size fits all approach to weed management and reservoirs. Each water body, even if they're nearby, even if they're in the same river system, is going to be distinct, and each one needs to be clearly defined. Natural systems are far more complex than our impoundments, so most reservoirs are more simple systems than natural lakes. These are inherently artificial. We're typically talking about dammed rivers, so the system that's there now is not the system that was there 300 years ago. What are the goals of management? We need to be clear about what we want to accomplish. Eradication is a very big word and can be extremely difficult, especially if we're talking about things like hydrilla. So it's usually better to set other targets such as non-nuisance level or something like that. In big public systems, it can be really helpful to have technical advisory committees where you're bringing in various experts and doing due diligence on a lot of different aspects. And of course, large public systems also require public input and public outreach to communicate what the management plan is, what's going to be accomplished, and where we're going from here. Next slide, please. Lake vegetation surveys are really important. So before you start getting into management, you really need to know what's out there and where everything is. Next slide, please. Typically, most reservoirs are under monitored. So from a plant standpoint, a lot of systems, there's no plant survey until after an invasive plant is confirmed. And then the surveys are done. So there's not necessarily a baseline to compare to. We know what's out there once the invasive species are there, but we don't know what the system was like 5 years ago or whatever. So we typically work with very little vegetation history for most water bodies. So defining what normal is can be a challenge or can be somewhat arbitrary. So are the plant populations also distinct biotypes from other populations? So we've got different biotypes of hydrilla in the country, as Brett said. There's different biotypes, genotypes of Vallisneria. Just because you have one particular species doesn't mean that it's the same biotype, genotype, or whatever from other populations, and it doesn't mean it's going to grow the same way as what might be in some other reservoir systems. Typically, also comprehensive nutrient surveys are limited, so we don't necessarily know, if nutrients are increasing over time, if that's part of the driver. But the more survey historical data is present, the better our decision making can be. Also, bathymetric maps may be outdated, so that can complicate herbicide application. So we have to have accurate bathymetry if you're going to do an in-water herbicide application. And in general, game fish are likely to be the most monitored component of the system. There's usually more data available on game fish than anything else. Next slide, please. So as we move into mapping lake vegetation, it's really important to have an ecologically based assessment, that can be repeatable in time. So you want standard techniques, doing these in a repeatable manner so that we can compare year over year. We have to define plant distribution and abundance. So where is each species found and how much of it is found in each location? And we definitely need to quantify trends both across space, across time, and overall dynamics of what the plants are doing in the system. And again, a key feature here is repeatability, because we need to know if we do management that our management is having an impact. And the only way to do that is to have consistent survey methods. Next slide, please. So there are also limitations to mapping. If it's a human-driven process, and there's potential subjectivity in those evaluations. So you have a human that is saying how much of the plant species is out there. So, different people are going to have different opinions on that or different observations. It's also fairly inefficient typically because you have people in boats and boats having to go transect across reservoirs. So that's going to take time to do these repeatable measures. We often can only gather one class of species as well. So if you're doing a rake toss, you're going to collect submerged species, and that's not necessarily the right approach for collecting emergent species. So you might have to have a different type of survey if you want to focus on emergent species versus submersed. And all this can add up to extreme costs and require a lot of post-processing as well. And also depending on if you're using satellite imagery or drones or whatever, there's going to need to be ground truthing involved with that. Next slide, please. So with point intercept, you define points on a map, and then you go out to each one of those points, do something like a rake toss, and then you record presence, absence. Presence would be a 1, absence would be a 0. And then you can also have a subjective measure of how much of each species is out there. But the key point here is that you're identifying species. Next slide, please. And then you can add on something like sonar hydroacoustics, and this will tell you how much is down there, but it's not going to tell you what species is down there. So it is very compatible with the rake toss. Rake toss will tell you what, and hydroacoustics can tell you how much, and you can generate a heat map like you see on the left. The brighter the color, the more plants are present in individual sections of that reservoir. The lighter the blue, then the less plants you have present. Next slide, please. And then you can generate a map like this, which is essentially a community map for the individual plant species. So you can have hydrilla alone, you can have hydrilla plus kabamba, hydrilla plus Eurasian water milfoil. So all kinds of different plant communities are possible in a single reservoir. Next slide. Now, as we move along towards management, it is really important to understand key features of plant biology because the individual biology of these plants are going to determine how susceptible they are to individual management techniques. So we need to know what their growth is, what their reproduction strategy is, and a good management technique is going to have to both interfere with growth and also interfere with reproduction. So you can take a very good management technique and you can apply it at a bad time and it can be completely unsuccessful. So timing can be very important for your management technique. And sometimes tools that look really good in the short term can look very bad next year or the year after. Next slide, please. So moving back to hydrilla, which Brett talked about, hydrilla produces both subterranean and axillary turions, and those do have a dormancy period that can make them prolong for years in a system. So obviously species that produce propagules such as hydrilla are going to be far more difficult to manage than those that don't. And hydrilla in a southeastern reservoir could take 10 years or so to completely deplete the turion bank. So there's nothing that you can do from a management standpoint to get rid of hydrilla in a single year. You can look at some closely related species to hydrilla like Agarria densa, and it does not produce seed or turion. So in theory, you could go out and eliminate all of Agarria in a single growing season. But you can't do that with hydrilla. And if you look at the picture on the very bottom, that was a hydrilla sprout that was clipped off. The hydrilla turion then formed 2 new sprouts, and the initial sprout that was clipped off has formed roots. So now you've got 2 plants. So mechanical techniques also on some of these species like hydrilla can be a really poor choice just because of species biology. Next slide, please. So obviously you all understand why we have to manage aquatic weeds, several different things here, but let's skip along. So in our reservoirs, we have these multi-purpose reservoirs, so property values can be decreased, recreation can be decreased. If we're talking about a steam generation plant, it's going to require a high amount of water inflow to operate. There should be a picture that pops up if you hit next. So if you have intake grates that start getting clogged up with vegetation, then you're probably going to want to do management pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So this is just a very fast overview on this slide of techniques that are available for aquatic plant management. So on this slide, as you move from top to bottom, you're moving from no plants to really dense vegetation. So there are some techniques that are really only can be used where you have either no vegetation like prevention or very few plants like hand weeding, and then other techniques like grass carp and herbicide that can be used whether you have few plants or a ton of plants. Next slide, please. So this will be grass carp and grass carp impact. Here's a fence keeping grass carp out of this exclosure. So you can see down at the bottom of the image where you have grass carp freely swimming, there are no plants. Where you have no grass carp above, you have a lot of plants. That's a typical outcome of a grass carp stocking, kind of all or nothing effect. You can get rid of all of your submerged plants with grass carp, or see no impact if you don't stock, if you have very few grass carp out there or no grass carp out there. Next slide, please. And then sometimes before a herbicide application, dyes will be used to track water flow. These will make the herbicide application more accurate because you know what water movement is, what retention time is, and that can help with calculations for aquatic herbicides. Next slide. So this is a before and after picture before herbicide treatment on a southeastern reservoir, and you can see how successful the treatment was. So we are able to successfully remove plants with herbicides when the appropriate preparation work is done. The next slide. And this is native riffleweed in a river in between impoundments where there was a herbicide treatment here to remove hydrilla. So the treatment successfully removed hydrilla and left behind the native desirable riffleweed that some rare species use this as habitat. So you can do treatments also to take out an invasive and leave behind desirable species. Next slide. And that's all of mine. Thank you.
I'm coming. Okay, sorry about that. A little trouble with my mute button. All right, so thank you very much to Rob and Brett. We're going to move on to our next speaker, which is Kyle Ruona. Kyle is a conservation biologist with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Kansas City District, where he has dedicated 19 years to environmental stewardship. His career, which has spanned both in the field and the office, has equipped him with extensive practical and technical expertise. In his role, Kyle leads the district's comprehensive invasive species program, addressing terrestrial, aquatic, and pathogenic threats. He also serves on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers National Invasive Species Leadership Team, which shapes research, policy, and program management. So Kyle, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, so real quick before we get started, or I guess I'll just give a quick rundown. I'll be discussing the Kansas City District U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, kind of who we are, what we do, the aquatic invasive species that are present, most impactful to us, and kind of what's on the radar, what we're kind of keeping our eyes on, and then a problem at one of our hydropower facilities and what we hope to be a solution, or what's been observed as a solution to that problem. So real quick, top right, hopefully you can see the white line. It's kind of like a topographic looking line. That represents our district boundary, our area of responsibility. It's based on the Lower Missouri watershed. Within that, you can see the green outlines are our lake projects, as well as the one that's outlined in yellow. That is Harry S. Truman Lake, where the problem that I mentioned occurred or has occurred. And so we'll be discussing that one a little more in detail. That's why I wanted to highlight that in yellow. It's in kind of central Missouri. It's also pictured below. You can see the dam impoundment in the hydropower facility as well. Hopefully you can see kind of like the little red outlines. That's along the Missouri River. We have 30 mitigation sites that we manage for to mitigate for habitat loss due to the channelization of the Missouri River as well. So yes, we're centrally located there. District office is in Kansas City. You can see Kansas and Missouri is where a majority of our responsibility lies, but it goes as far out to eastern Colorado, southern portions of Nebraska, and Iowa as well. Next slide. So what we do, we have various authorized missions. A handful of those are consistent at every lake, but there's not one lake that has all of these authorized missions present. But what they are is flood risk management, navigation, hydropower, recreation, fish and wildlife management, water supply, and irrigation. So you probably couldn't tally them up on the map, but we have 18 lake projects, 2 of which are hydropower dams. Those hydropower dams are located in Missouri, areas Truman Lake and Stockton Lake, kind of in central and southern Missouri. We have 30 mitigation sites along the Missouri River. In 2024, we had 15.77 million, or approximately that many visits to all of our lakes. In 2025, we had our 2 hydropower facilities powered approximately 30,000 homes. We have 198,000 acres of water that we manage and 371,500 acres of land. And I mention that because we do not have much public access in our area, so we provide a lot of that public access resource to water or land for the public. So aquatic invasive species in our area of responsibility, I guess we're fortunate to not have too many that have been impactful to us. We have had zebra mussels for quite some time, probably going back to the early 2010s. Unfortunately, they're present almost everywhere. We haven't been able to do much to control their presence in reservoirs. We have done spot treatments with copper sulfate, and that has been unsuccessful. More than anything, the impact to our dam facilities has been probably the biggest concern, as well as to any type of water intake. As you've seen in pictures, they accumulate and they'll clog or disrupt the flow of water through those systems. Phragmites is also known as common reed, is more present in the western half of our district. It is kind of aquatic, semi-aquatic grass that can really disrupt ecosystems. It could even pose somewhat of a navigation issue by becoming so dense that you can't really move vessels through a body of water. We do treat that with chemical, but a problem with that is accessibility. So a lot of our treatments end up being aerial applications. And it's difficult because those have to occur frequently over many years to really get much of a control or success with the control there. And it hasn't been mentioned yet, but we do experience harmful algal blooms at most of our lakes. Not always. It depends on the weather circumstances, the inflows, the water conditions, but we do have many, or pretty much all of our reservoirs are aging reservoirs. They have been around for 50 years or more. Sedimentation is occurring, some at more higher levels than others. And that sediment is bound with nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen that fuel the cyanobacteria that creates these blooms. So right now, when we're getting significant inflows, we live in a very agricultural driven area. So a lot of those nutrients flow during those high flow events and accumulate within the reservoir, and that nutrients becomes a part of the water column and fuels those blooms. And those are more impactful for recreation, could be harmful to wildlife or people, and can kind of cause some issues, like some water quality issues, especially for drinking water, some kind of distasteful smells. Nearby, kind of what's on our radar, what we're paying attention to and hopefully preventing. It's been mentioned already, the various types of invasive carp. What we're fortunate to have is our dam impoundments are physical barriers for the movement of these carp, because at a handful of our lakes, you can find them downstream, but they're not in the lake themselves. But what we're concerned with is the inadvertent transportation of these fish that could disrupt the ecosystem, the fisheries within the lake, as well as potentially pose a recreational hazard, like you saw in the picture of those fish jumping in the air while boaters are, enjoying themselves in the lake. Hydrilla is found in a couple watersheds of lakes in the state of Missouri, and we work with the Missouri Department of Conservation to do some monitoring with them. Unfortunately, we have not found any presence of hydrilla within our area, but we continue to monitor and partner with the state of Missouri to kind of stay on top of that. And, if there were to be any presence, we definitely engage in some significant controls there. Northern snakehead fish has been found in southeast Missouri. We're hoping that its movement does not spread rapidly, because it could cause some ecosystem issues, some wildlife issues to our native fisheries and wildlife at our lakes. Same thing with rescue crayfish. It's present in the state of Missouri and Kansas, but we have not observed it at any of our lakes, but it could, like I said, disrupt the native ecosystem. Salt cedar, also known as tamarisk, it is a plant. It's found more on the western edge of our district. And we don't see much of it, but we are definitely monitoring for it and attacking it, controlling it as soon as we find it. So next slide. So like I mentioned earlier, we're going to discuss a little bit about Harry S. Truman Lake and particularly zebra mussels, and a problem that was kind of observed or expected, and a solution that we have come up with. So just real quick, give you a little background. Harry S. Truman Dam, located on the Osage River near Warsaw, Missouri, is a multi-use facility providing flood control, power generation, recreation, and fish and wildlife management. The dam, which forms Truman Lake, is a 126-foot high earth and rock embankment structure with a concrete section containing a gated spillway and power plant consisting of 6 incline access 32 megavolt ampere generator motor units. Power generation at Harry S. Truman started in 1979. Each unit utilizes large amounts of raw water to cool the generator and thrust bearing oil. In addition to this cooling water, Harry S. Truman utilizes raw water to support other critical systems. And you'll kind of understand why I've ended with that raw water component here in a little bit. So if any of you have watched the show Ozarks, it focuses on Lake of the Ozarks, which is on the Osage River just below Truman Lake. Zebra mussels were reported in Lake of the Ozarks in 2006, likely through transportation of vessels or docks. It's a very developed lake. So with that, and with it being that close proximity, it's not uncommon for a lake or a boat on Lake of the Ozarks to go and spend time at Lake of the Ozarks, and then later in the day go to Harry S. Truman Lake. So we anticipated the potential for zebra mussels to become present and introduced into Truman Lake is very likely. So in 2010, a facility vulnerability assessment was completed by the Bureau of Reclamation, and they found the most susceptible structures to mussel-related impacts included the power plant, intake structure, trash racks, but also the raw water and surface water systems, the transformer, fire protection system, and drainage systems. So unfortunately, 10 years later, in 2016, zebra mussels were reported at Truman Lake. And to provide a little more detail for the next slide, to let you know kind of what the raw water system feeds. So it provides water to various hose bibs for cleaning and maintenance, air handling units, fire pumps for the transformer deluge system, and diesel generator cooling. Next slide. So everything highlighted in yellow, go back one. Yeah, everything highlighted yellow within the water cooling system schematics here is a part of the raw water system. So it's very extensive, a lot of different connection points, a lot of different lines in there. So if zebra mussels were to become present, they'd have a lot of places to go and a lot of opportunity to create problems. Next slide. So we're fortunate to get funding in the early 2020s to complete a study that looked at alternatives to control zebra mussels within the raw water system. And you can see the 5 that are listed there. One that's not listed is ultraviolet light. And the reason why that was not considered is because a similar project in South Dakota utilized ultraviolet light to control zebra mussels, and they found it unsuccessful because of how turbid the water is, and Harry S. Truman Lake is a very turbid water, so we did not consider that. Ultimately, what we landed on was a copper-based pesticide distribution system because of its cost, efficacy, simplicity, mobility, its impact, and long-term maintenance. And ultimately, really why we landed on that was cost. If you look at a copper, what we what we were pursuing at first was a copper ion generator that was going to cost over $1 million. AIS Truman Lake sells their power to the Southwest Power Administration, who would have to front that cost for the copper iron generator and the $1 million cost or more. And that cost would come from who they sell power to, which would increase their household rates. So we wanted to avoid that, and not to mention modifying the raw water system or constructing a closed loop system would have been a multi-million-dollar project as well. Next slide. So this is how we distribute the copper-based pesticide. It's with a micro skid by Tough Skid. It utilizes EarthTech QZ pesticide that falls within the state water quality standards. It's a mobile unit, and there are numerous connection points that have been installed within the raw water system to kind of target applications to certain areas. Next slide. So you can see, here's just kind of a picture. If you think back to one of those previous slides that showed the line through the raw water system, there are stems that have been installed where the microskid can be connected to, and we can distribute the pesticide through the system. I believe it functions without shutting down any of the hydropower or the raw water itself. It just goes and acts as like a flush through the system. And I didn't mention this earlier, but zebra mussel abundance at Truman Lake in general, or at the hydropower facility, has not been significant. There hasn't not been really any impacts, but we're prepared to deal with that if that were to occur.
All right, thanks so much, Kyle. And we are going to move right along for our next speaker, who is Michael Stevenson. Michael is a resource professional leader for Idaho Power Company. He manages crews that monitor resident fish populations as well as endangered aquatic snails, and has worked on regional aquatic invasive species issues since 2006. Recently, Idaho Power has been actively involved in a large-scale chemical treatment of the Snake River that was implemented by Idaho State Department of Agriculture from 2023 to 25, and Michael holds a Master's of Science degree from Ohio University.
Thanks, Susan. So I appreciate all the background information the previous presenters gave on Dreissenid mussels and other invasive species. But I'm going to focus on the quagga mussels because it's an active, ongoing threat. Next slide, please. So as you saw in previous presentations, Dreissenid mussels and hydropower do not mix. And I will clarify that quagga mussels are in the same genus as zebra mussels, and they pretty much react on the hydropower facility exactly the same, and it's not good. These are photographs from the Lower Colorado system. Quagga mussels were introduced into the Lower Colorado in 2008, and at that time, the Idaho Invasive Species Council was formed, and there was a lot of focus on keeping quagga mussels out of Idaho. Next slide, please. So Idaho Power is a publicly traded utility that operates in South and central Idaho. We operate 17 hydropower plants, mostly on the Snake River. We do have a couple of tributary plants on the Malad River and the Payette River. But on this slide, the area of focus is kind of the center right between 15 and 16 are power plants, Shoshone Falls and Twin Falls in this area. This is a steep canyon area, difficult river access in this area. And then the other thing I'll point out is our Milner plant on the far right is an agricultural dam that we make power off of. The water above this is fully allocated for agriculture. So flows that come past Milner Dam are spring generated. And so the area we're treating is a very unique system where it doesn't get high flows and it is fairly low velocity, generally around 350 CFS during the fall time. Next slide, please. So, to put it in context, in the greater world, we're on the upstream again in the bottom right. You see the 17 and 18 numbers. Those are the plants we'll be speaking about. But we are, kind of on the holding the line for the Columbia River Basin. There's a lot of hydropower in this area, and what happens to us, kind of flows downstream. So what happens in Idaho is going to impact Washington and Oregon pretty directly, through the Columbia River as the snake flows into the Columbia. So the impacts for us have a lot of impacts to other people in the Pacific Northwest. Next slide, please. So Idaho Power, our personal concerns, we have license compliance issues. If quagga mussels take hold, it's going to impact everything from water quality, aquatic vegetation, native fish. We have the sturgeon there in the center. My friends, the endangered snails are there on the right, which are quite small, which will be inundated by quagga mussels. And then, the food web problems. And then, impacts to recreational facilities are also been identified as, direct impacts that are coming if this issue isn't contained. Next slide, please. So in 2011, the state of Idaho commissioned a study on our risk for Dreissena mussel introduction. We have a high calcium system for most of the state. And again, in this bottom center right, we're as red as can be. So we knew that this threat was imminent since this point. We're very, very susceptible for Dreissena mussels. Next slide, please. So as part of that, Idaho Power identified this as a threat to our operation. So in 2011, myself and our power plant manager at the time went through our systems and identified where the risks are. And it's the same as every other hydro plant. The cooling water systems are the threat. Since that time, we've done individual vulnerability assessments at all of our plants. And so we are prepared. And then in 2013, Idaho Power hosted a rapid response exercise, and this was with local stakeholders between the states of Idaho and Oregon, and then any federal agencies. And so we came up with a plan. What are we going to do if these things show up? Which was super helpful when they did. Next slide, please. So this shows the treatment area in 2024. The quagga mussels were actually discovered in the fall of 2023. This is probably a better slide. This is borrowed from the Idaho State Department of Agriculture, who implemented the treatment, but it kind of gives you an overview of where they were picking up Dreissena mussel veligers in 23 and 24. Next slide, please. So the state of Idaho implemented an aggressive approach to treat the river. So like I was saying, this is a low flow section. So 10 miles downstream, we get a big influx of spring water, which increases the river volume by 10 times. So this was kind of actually a lucky location for this to occur. And in 2023 and 2024, they treated 16 miles of river. They used a product called Natrix, which is a liquid chelated copper. To kill Dreissena mussels, we needed to reach parts per million of one part per million in the river. Next slide, please. And so in that sequence between slides, you can see that the actual active treatment area was reduced by about 50%. So the initial treatments were effective. There were issues with native fish kills and stuff initially. But in this last treatment, we're dealing with a much smaller section of river. And what we identified in this particular treatment, divers were put into the reservoirs to look for quagga mussels. And we discovered that there were 3 distinct deep holes that probably didn't receive treatment because of the physical aspects of these holes, where the greater river was treated, but that water was flowing over kind of in a laminar form, and these deep holes weren't being treated. So the state of Idaho came up with kind of a unique way to get the copper down into these deep holes, and we're talking 60 to 90 feet deep. And so they injected directly into there using a diluted form of chelated copper to kind of keep it from settling out too quickly. So the top part of the river was treated and the bottom part of the river was treated, but that area between 15 or 30 feet and 90 feet, the copper chemical was a little bit too heavy. So they diluted the chemical, directly injected into these holes, and now we're kind of crossing our fingers. They were having a hard time getting the copper to even equilibrate in those holes with that direct injection. But one of the things that happened during this last treatment was we had a big storm event that came through and basically turned the reservoirs over. After that point, they were getting their correct 1 part per million throughout the water column, which is giving us some hope. Next slide, please. So Hydropower's role in this, we're not a resource agency. We did not implement the treatment, but we are strategically located in this very inaccessible section of river. So our role was basically, logistics and coordination. We help the state get the chemicals to the river. In this case, this is our Shoshone Falls plant. And we have this skipjack that can, transport heavy things. So they utilize our systems to get the chemicals to the river. And we also actively injected directly into the intakes of the Shoshone Falls power plant and the Twin Falls. Next slide, please. So this is our Twin Falls intake. And as you can see, we're directly injecting right into the system. I was surprised that our power plant operators weren't concerned about the degradation of the equipment within the site. But this really helps the state get the chemicals to the river. Like I was saying, it's a very canyony area, so it's difficult to access. There's no boat access, especially below Twin Falls between the two plants. And so that was our role was we helped facilitate this. And there's also issues, we're allowing contractors and state reps to get behind FERC locked boundaries. So it does create some coordination issues with, staffing and things like that. Because to have people behind a locked FERC gate, you need staff on site. So there was some impacts to the company financially that way. But, the greater good was kind of the driving force of this. And so we implemented this treatment. Next slide, please. So what we're doing, we've implemented, Hydropower has a big environmental staff where we do all of our in-house studies. So we have about 80 boats in-house. And so we were concerned about boats going in there. So we implemented a pretty aggressive decontamination training. We've purchased, I think we're up to 5 hot water decontamination units. So anytime a boat goes into a reach or river and then is moved to another reach or river, we use the national protocols for decontamination. So currently we're preparing for our next treatment. We're kind of waiting and seeing. So the way that the active villagers are determined is by sampling during the breeding season, which occurs here in August. And so the state is, doing some monitoring now. But once the summer starts up, July, August, they'll do an aggressive sampling program to try and find active villagers to determine whether or not the last treatment was successful and the next treatment will be implemented. And then in-house, we're updating our individual power plant contingency plans, and we are proceeding with contracting with ultraviolet light treatment systems. Next slide, please. And so in here, I definitely have to tip my hat to all the work that's being done in the Western region that Susan supports. The Columbia River Basin team was instrumental in getting the rapid response exercise going. They're a big partner in what's going on in the West and trying to prevent invasive species. So I provided a link there. And then to get more information on the actual treatment, I would direct you to the Idaho Department of Ag's quagga mussel information site. And these links are posted in the chat because on the slideshow itself, I don't think the links work. So if you want more information about how we treated the river, I would direct you to those locations. And then, just finally, just show you the beauty of Shoshone Falls. You can see how it's inaccessible. There's no boat access here. So how else would you get chemical to the river? But this is a very beautiful location. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker. Thanks, Risa.
Great, and thank you, Michael. And I agree, it is very beautiful. All right, we have one more speaker for you, and our last one is going to be Andrew Hudson. Andrew is a fishery biologist at Albany Falls Dam in Old Town, Idaho. He is responsible for overseeing the design, construction, and operation of the fish passage facility at the dam, which is currently in the design process for future implementation. Andrew also serves as the Northwestern Division Invasive Species Leadership Team co-representative, along with Kyle, who we heard from earlier. And he is responsible for zebra and quagga mussel monitoring and reporting for the Northwestern Division. Andrew also works alongside the U.S. Army Corps Engineer Research and Development Center's toxicologist, Damon Walter, as well as Albany Falls project staff to administer flowering rush treatments in the Penn Oriole Basin. Great. Andrew, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Susan. Yeah, so like Susan mentioned, my name is Andrew Huddleston, fisheries biologist here at Albany Falls Dam in North Idaho. You can see in the first slide the powerhouse on the upper right, and then our spillway looking downstream on the left, and then the bottom picture is Lake Pend Oreille during a heavy windstorm. You can go ahead and next slide, please. So brief overview what we'll be going over today. Just give a background on our dam, villager sampling points that we are currently collecting annually, quarterly rather, and vulnerability assessments past and future, and then just a brief synopsis on our flowering rush treatments. Next slide, please. So Albany Falls Dam has 5 main missions. Hydropower, navigation being just keeping debris out of the lake, keeping it open navigable waters. Flood control being our primary mission. Our spillway is a 10-bay spillway. Our powerhouse is a smaller 3-generator, 3-unit, low capacity producing electricity producing dam. So main mission here at Albany is flood control. Environmental stewardship is why I have my job. Fisheries management, wildlife management, and then of course recreation is a huge one as well. Dam was built in 1951 to 1955, authorized by Flood Control Act. Next slide, please. So this is a brief overview of our district. So within our district, this is Seattle district, but below us is Portland district and Walla Walla district, and then further east is Kyle district and Kansas City and Omaha district. They all fall within Northwestern Division, but what you see highlighted on the map here is the Seattle district. So within the district we have Libby Dam in Montana, downstream is Albany Falls, further downstream the federal Columbia River hydropower system is Chief Joseph Dam on the Columbia River, and then you kind of work your way to the east or the west coast there, with Howard Hansen, Mud Mountain, and the locks in Seattle. Next slide, please. So just a brief ownership. I share this slide because it shows a good representation of what the Corps of Engineers owns. The rest of the property ownership, a bulk of it, is privately owned or state owned or Forest Service owned. Those are kind of the main ownerships in and around the lake. So you're looking at the north end of Lake Pend Oreille, the bridge coming out of Sandpoint, that town there on the upper left. That is technically where the lake ends and the river begins. And so showing the slide to show there are many boat ramps and access points in and around the lake, especially down in on the furthest kind of the right side of the map there, there is a marina, which there's a lot of villager samples. I'll show you here in a second. But just saying, putting that out there we're very vulnerable, like Michael mentioned, just from a high calcium standpoint, very desirable conditions for zebra quagga mussels to establish themselves, but also very vulnerable in the fact that we have a lot of access points for these mussels to go undetected and infest the waters. Next slide, please. So coming down from the lake, going down the river, all the brown polygons you see there are Corps-owned properties. Bulk of river ownership is private. And then once the river hits Albany, it goes north up into Canada, and then joins the Columbia just after that. Again, we have 5 boat ramps that we manage as Corps of Engineers. We outgrant over 12 other boat ramps to Idaho Fish and Game, and then there's over 100 privately owned boat ramps along the lake, in addition to public boat ramps that have marinas and public boat launches, etc. So a lot of potential access points. Next slide, please. This is the Pacific States Marine monitoring map, mussel monitoring map. So all the blue dots you see are areas that are actively being monitored for veliger samples. Like it was mentioned before, veligers are the small baby form of zebra quagga mussels, and they are microscopic. So we take quarterly tows of, at least on our agency does, a lot of redundancy that is intentional. It's trying to find a needle in a haystack scenario potentially, especially catching it early. So you can see the Pend Oreille, Lake Pend Oreille and the river there, kind of center right of the map there. Next slide, please. The red stars that you see here are veliger sample points that we collect. Those are all intentional. The cluster of 3 you see on the right there, that's all around the Ellisport Bay. Gets a lot of international and national attention and visitation. So we focus a lot there. And then, of course, where the lake ends, you'll see a cluster there, as well as water coming down from the Clark Fork River from Flathead. So that is what we do for veliger sampling. It's redundant, like I mentioned, because we want to make sure we're capturing anything that might be in the water column. But we have a 1,200-foot deep lake further south on the lake towards Farragut State Park. So if zebra mussels, quagga mussels get established, we don't have the options that they did on the snake, where we can cordon off areas unless we catch it early in a marina or a boat ramp. Once they're established, they're kind of here. So we're very much in a defense pattern. We have multiple boat check stations managed by ISDA, WDFW, in an effort to keep the mussels out, because once they're established, it's not good news. So next slide, please. Won't go into the details on this, but this is infestation success levels on the right, low, moderate, and high, and then on the left column, the parameters. So you can kind of see the higher the calcium, the higher the infestation success levels for zebra quagga mussels, and each of these are analyzed along the dams, along the FRCPS. There are some parameters that are not currently being monitored, but we are in a kind of a Corps-wide, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers wide effort right now to monitor and kind of find where those gaps are, so that we're prepared for future infestations. Next slide, please. Moving out of ZQM into flowering rush, just real quick. So we have a supplemental environmental assessment, which allows us to treat flowering rush, Eurasian water milfoil, gives us a pretty wide range of tools to treat those species. On the picture you see on the screen is a flowering rush infested area along the river. That is one of our submerged areas. We have, over the years, we started back up in 2023 with ERDIC's assistance financially, and also Damian Walters has been out here to assist with a lot of research out on Lake Pend Oreille and on the Pend Oreille River. So we use Priscilla for Asian water milfoil, but really we're using Aquastrike and Reward and Imazapyr for dewatered for flowering rush. So next slide, please. This is a kind of just a storyboard template of one of our efforts on Odin Bay East on the lake, north end of the lake. So you can kind of see in the picture where Damien's looking over the boat, you can see kind of that lighter color is where we treated, dewatered the previous year. And that four-wheeler below Damien is putting out Imazapyr with the blue dye. And you can kind of see the success of where we treated versus where we didn't. The darker color is all flowering rush, and the lighter color is successfully treated or knocked back flowering rush. So we are seeing great success with dewatered treatments, not so much with submerged. It's more of a year after year effort for submerged treatments, but still moderate success with submerged. Next slide, please. And then lastly, the pre and post treatment we're required, because we are doing research for ERDIC. We're required to do pre and post treatment surveys. So on the right, you can see an untreated stand of flowering rush, looks kind of like a bowl, plate of spaghetti. And then on the left, you see a treated stand of flowering rush. So that's what we're out there looking for, pre and post treatment, 6 weeks after treatment. And then we do about 2 weeks post or pre. So, and I think that's all I have for my presentation. Next slide, please. Yep.
Any questions? I know we're going long, so let's see. I see a Larry Frylock question. Across the range of control options under research, genetic and molecular methods, species-specific biocontrols, new chemicals, and physical treatments, which approaches look most viable for managing invasive mussels? What about replacing vulnerable water conveyance piping and other susceptible structures with copper pipe or copper coatings? Anyone could address that quickly? We don't want to lose everyone because we realize we're at the end of the time. But if someone wants to address that one, possible to do quickly? Brian?
I know we've looked at copper options and coatings, and it's really ineffective for mussel attachment. It works on boats in the ocean, but it's not really effective on inland waters.
Okay, thanks. So since we're kind of long, Susan, I think we'll just go to thanking everyone who was here. Thank you so much for moderating. And if you have an opportunity to fill in that session survey, we would so appreciate it, because we're planning for future webinars. We have a couple more coming up. If you signed up, you'll be able to get signed up automatically for those. And then we just have really quick on upcoming events. This is sort of hydro related. We're going to be talking about recreational releases from hydropower plants on the Pigeon, on the New and the Gauley and the Deerfield and the Lehigh. And so that's coming up. Again, thank you for filling out the survey if you can. We have a YouTube channel. It's available if you just go to our website. And here's one more request to fill out the survey. So I'm going to leave it there, and thank you so much for attending, all of you guys who were, and Susan, who helped out today. Thank you so much. We'll get a recording out to everyone who attended. And if you have any questions, send it to, if you weren't able to catch the email addresses of our presenters, send it to me. If not, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. And have a good day.
Thanks so much.